has never been a more important time to move in a vegan direction. Whether you're ready to start, restart, or re-energize your vegan or plant-based practice, this podcast is for you. I'm Michelle Olander, life coach, vegan, ADHD matriarch, travel lover, and smoothie loather. And I know that it's the details that get in the way of your vegan journey. But I like to believe that the obstacle is always the way. So every week we meet here where I translate the tools of life coaching and Stoic philosophy. I bring you actionable tips, some laughs, interesting guests, and vegan ideas for everyone at any age. All to help you veg your best. Episode 231, Not Another Bloody Vegan, my interview with Jim Moore from the Bloody Vegans podcast. Welcome back, my Veg Your Bestie. It's February. Finally. We made it. And this week, I have a really long-awaited guest, Jim Moore from the Bloody Vegans podcast and Bloody Vegans Productions. Podcaster, producer, musician, activist, lifelong learner. This episode might be a little longer than some of the interviews because I just couldn't cut anything out. Jim reveals how a chance encounter with the documentary Cowspiracy led him and his wife to suddenly adopt a vegan lifestyle in 2017. Not only did the new perspective affect his dietary choices, it also propelled him into advocacy, community building, and entrepreneurship as a vegan. Originally designed as an educational journey for himself, Jim's podcast, The Bloody Vegans, rapidly became a significant resource for so many of us navigating all the different aspects and ideas contained in veganism. I think you'll see that Jim also delves into technical and creative aspects of podcasting, and we nerded out a little bit. He shared insights on audio engineering, the importance of room acoustics, the impact of thoughtful question asking, and beyond his personal podcasting ventures, Jim has turned that passion into a new profession, helping others create and refine their own shows through his business, Bloody Vegans Productions. And for any of you who have been thinking about starting a podcast, you'll find out how to get a discount off your first episode from Jim and Bloody Vegans Productions. So whether you're interested in vegan entrepreneurship, podcasting, or simply a compelling story of personal transformation, I think this episode has something for all of us. I'll see you on the other side. Jim Moore from the Bloody Vegans Productions and podcast. Welcome to Veg Your Best.
Hey, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's kind of been a long time in the making. We had a couple interrupted tries along the way, so I'm really delighted you're here. Thank you for making the time.
Oh no, for sure. Like I've long been a follower of your show. Loved having you on mine. So yeah, absolute honor to be here.
Well, we are recording this the day before the U.S. election, 2024, and you and I were just personally chatting about it. But we won't be talking about the election on the podcast. But there are a lot of very political reasons to be vegan and to be plant-based. And there are a lot of very important reasons to educate yourself. And I always feel that your podcast has been not just your advocacy, but your way of educating yourself.
For sure. Like that was where it all started, to be honest. I mean, if we go back, so I've been vegan since 2017. It was a chance encounter due to, I have to be, I'm not really thankful to algorithms, but on this particular case, I'm thankful to the Netflix algorithm, which presented me one day with Cowspiracy one afternoon. Watched it, couldn't couldn't believe it at first. I considered myself a bit of an environmentalist. That was where my angle was at the beginning. Watching Cowspiracy kind of shook that belief to its core. And like I say, I got to the end of it and didn't actually believe what I'd seen. I thought, well, that can't be. If that was true, we'd have all heard about that. That would be big news in sort of environmental circles, surely. Um, and so there was a fantastic resource on the Cowspiracy website, which was a facts and resources page, and it essentially fact checked everything that was said, and it had timestamps. So it said, we said this in at 2 minutes 48, and this is the source material for that. This is the reference point. And so I checked that out in my kind of disbelief and saw Oxford University, Joseph Paul's very famous sort of study. I saw United Nations, I saw the World Health Organization, I saw all these organizations that uh, I thought, well, they had credibility to me. I was kind of like, well, these can't be these organizations are not, they're not 2-bit organizations. They should, there's some credibility to it. If Oxford University have done a study, read some of those studies. I just literally took over this a whole afternoon. My wife came home from work. She must have detected I looked a little shell shocked. Uh, and she said, "Are you okay?" I was like, "We need to watch this. You need to watch this film. We're going to watch this film tonight. You need to watch it." And I think I'm vegan was kind of what I said. And she watched it and she said she was of the same opinion. And then that day we were like, okay, well, that's that. We don't eat anything that comes from an animal. Um, Fast forward. So we figured it all out. We went through the whole process. We went through the kind of journey. There was lots of places that helped me on that journey, and we'll probably come to some of those, in due course. But um, fast forward to kind of 2019, and by this point, I wasn't just in it for environmental reasons. I was in it for all of the reasons, and actually, probably, as most people say, they come for one reason and they stay for the animals, and that was kind of where I was at by 2019. And but I still didn't actually know any vegans in real life. I had seen vegans in documentaries, obviously, and I'd vegans online, and there was a football club called Forest Green Rovers over here, which is the world's first vegan football club. It's a professional football team. They have vegan food served in the stands, and the players are fed vegan. The whole thing. The pitch is fed vegan fertilizer, the whole deal. So I had that as a kind of that was a resource point for me, but I didn't actually know anybody like in the flesh. Didn't actually know any real life humans. So locally to me, there was a vegan festival that was going on, and they were looking for a compere. They were looking for somebody to host the guest speakers. And I said, I wouldn't mind doing that. I've done a little bit of kind of public speaking stuff. I wouldn't mind doing that. And it was fascinating. It was absolutely brilliant. I got, I mean, instantly felt welcomed into a community. And there was a particular talk that was given by a lady called Chris with a K, and she talked about uh, the intersections between different causes, essentially. That kind of different forms of oppression all intersect at different points and different junctures. And often it's the same hand that's tipping the scale for one oppressed people that is also tipping the hand for the tipping the scale for the other. And that includes kind of animals within that too. And that seemed as a very left leaning uh, sort of vegan chap. That seemed all very reasonable to me. And I started the Q&A bit. So I had a mic and somebody was passing the mic around. So has anybody got any questions? And a guy put his hand up and he asked a question. His question was essentially, I think that the left has co-opted veganism. It's a single issue. It's about animal rights only. I'm on the right of politics. I'm centre right, he described himself. Um, and I was kind of like taken aback. But in my complete naivety, having not developed a community around me, I sort of just naively thought everyone was probably of the same perspective on veganism, and it made me think. In that 2 years, there's so little I know about this subject. um, I feel like I've lived it on one hand, but what I've lived is a complete fraction of what exists within the sort of the spectrum of veganism as a kind of practice, if you like, as a kind of a verb rather than a noun. And so that made me think, as any uh, right-minded millennial these days, I'll start a podcast. So I started a podcast, and I had the ambitious idea of I was going to interview a person a week. Um, and I did for about 200 episodes. I now don't because for other reasons that we'll come on to. I'm busy making other people's podcasts, but I did that, and it was purely, as you said in your very kind introduction, um, it was my own education. That was how I pitched it. I felt like if I don't know this stuff, then other people might not either, and so they might want a resource. They might be in the same position that I'm in, and so I tried as much as I could, not like I'm doing now, but to shut up and listen, essentially, ask questions and really let the fullness of an answer come out and try and really let it soak in. I didn't want it to be a podcast that was, there's so many podcasts out there where it's about the host's opinion. It's ultimately a thinly veiled kind of promotional piece for the host who's trying to be an influencer or whatever they're trying to be. And I really didn't want it to be that. I wanted it to be, I genuinely discover things about veganism. And I might bring some of those to other bits of other conversations, but ultimately it's a learning process, and it really was, and it really is. There's guests on there who've taught me aspects of veganism, but aspects of life and politics and cultural views and all kinds of different things that I just never knew about. I've been lucky. I've had some fantastic guests, but that's as you know, one thing about the vegan community is once you start asking and once you reach out, it's actually incredibly welcoming and surprisingly small for a big global kind of community of people. It's does feel quite connected when you start reaching out.
I agree. There are very few vegans who say, no, I will not be on your podcast.
Very few, thankfully. And that struck me early on. There was some people I just thought, oh, I'll just throw an invite out. They're never gonna say yes. There was like Paul Watson, as an example, who was like in my early days of veganism. Sea Shepherd came into my sort of orbit, and I was kind of just completely in awe and enamored by what they did. I thought this is just a wonderful way to spend your life and to devote your activism to go out there and physically stop things from happening. Um, and so Paul Watson was a bit of a hero. So I just reached out on the off chance and just said, "Hey, I've got this podcast. Would you like to come on it?" And it was like, "Yeah, okay." And he was, generously gave me an hour of his time. And Carol J. Adams was another one, author of just such seminal works. Sexual Politics of Meat was and is just a fantastic piece of work. And again, I just reached out. Who am I to reach out to Carol Adams? And I did, and she said yeah, and I got to spend an hour with her, and it was just before, funny enough, just before the last election. So we got to talk a little bit about that and how her work, how her writings, Sexual Politics of Meat, actually bore a real relevance to the election. And you could see it in some of the rhetoric, and this kind of like bringing the country back to a certain place. So just again, talking about education and a holistic kind of holistic education that I got from the episodes. I was just so lucky, and people were so generous.
I was very impacted by your interview with Carol J. Adams. She is a very interesting thinker, a very early thinker in many
Mm,
respects. And I remember hearing her talk about the retrograde politics
mm.
of a certain administration and the marketing and the running of that campaign. Um, and she did say one thing, which I don't know if it always stuck with me. I don't know if I agreed with it or not, but she talks about how the vegan community, she worried that the vegan and plant based community was spending too much time making veganism safe for men. Um,
Yes. Yeah, she did.
and I remember thinking, well, I like at least on my podcast, I feel like I'm always trying to make veganism safe for all kinds of different people who look at it and go, I don't think so. Maybe they're moms, maybe they're grandmothers, maybe they're very traditional people or food people who like, well, I created meals for decades for my family. How can I be someone who changes all that now? So I always feel like I'm in my 60s, I'm 65, and I always think that I'm trying to make veganism safe for older people or people who feel like it
Mm.
might be too late, too hard, and that, won't make enough of a difference. So I tiny bit I understand her point. I completely understand her point, but I also think we all have, what do we have, constituencies or demographics that need to see themselves in that, in
Yeah.
that ability, in that space.
Yeah, and yeah, and at the time, well, I still am. I'm heavily involved with a rugby club over here, a rugby club called the Green Gazelles Rugby Club, which is the world's first vegan rugby club. Um, and rugby, typically, maybe your US listeners, if they don't know too much about rugby, I don't know how big rugby is over in the States, but it's kind of American football, but with the fun put back in it. So you take all the helmets off and stuff. Um, and it's a very popular sport over here, but it is very um, associated with traditional gender stereotypes. It's the rugby boys into meat and beer. That kind of thing. And so the rugby club was kind of set up to challenge some of those stereotypes. Um, and on the point of making it safe for men, I kind of feel like that is actually probably our mission in a way at Green Gazelles. Where I happen to converge with sort of Carol's thinking on it though is I don't necessarily think that we do or um we're not really interested in saying things like um about veganism being for real men, that kind of thing. What's a real man? That doesn't really interest us. We just happen to exist playing this sport, and we talk about the sport, and we are who we are within that. So we've got all kinds of different people. We've got men's team, we've got women's teams, um, and we've got everybody within the sort of broad church of veganism and humanity. In fact, within that rugby team, different genders, sexualities, etc. Um, so whilst we're making it safe, I think we're not doing it in the way that is, you know, real men eat plants. Like, you know, uh, we're not interested in that language, if that makes sense.
It does make
Um,
sense.
but but making it safe though, I think is an important thing to do because otherwise you can end up in an echo chamber if you're not careful. Um, and that's we're all trying to avoid that, I think. Well, hopefully we're all trying to avoid that, as safe as it is.
And there's so many different ways to be vegan. There are the people who take it from a very health or
Mm.
anti-inflammation point of view. There are those who are extremely committed to animal liberation, and there are those who are very climate oriented or environmental impact oriented or social justice oriented. So there's so many ways, as you say. And I think many of us who are older and have kind of heard about veganism for 40 years, we kind of think about people who are very not standard, not traditional. They've really decided to be completely different. And so if you kind of identify as a middle of the road, kind of traditional, kind of cis normal,
Yeah.
woman or mother or grandmother, you think, well, I'm not like that. But it is a broad church. Yeah. And I think one of the great things about podcasting is it is an accessible medium where you can get so many different points of view right into your ear.
Yeah, and that's kind of coming onto podcasting. What attracted me in the first place? I was a podcast obsessive before I started one, long before I ever thought about running a business to do with podcasting. That wasn't my job. I was a retail manager working for Apple. Did that for 10 years, and I worked for another big retailer over here for 10 years before that. That was my career. I'd set my stall out along those lines. Um, but it was never my passion. It was just a job that I did. I was always very passionate though about podcasts. And I suppose what the specific thing was, I was passionate about people discussing ideas. From different perspectives. And the beauty of the medium for me is there's an intimacy to it. You're let into a conversation that happens to be going on. And what I kind of love about it is it's the best podcast for me anyway. Not all are like this, but the best podcasts for me are where this is going to sound a bit strange. I don't necessarily, but the audience isn't really in the speakers' minds, the guests and the hosts' minds. That they may be thinking, the host probably is thinking about, making content or whatever for their audience, but they're, I think the best conversations, the best podcasts for me are when two or more, however many people are engaged in a conversation that they are truly engaged in, and the chips fall where they fall, and it happens to be interesting and informative and maybe entertaining or whatever it is for their audience, as opposed to it being purposefully manufactured for an audience. If you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Those are my favorite kind of podcasts when it's I'm a fly on the wall in an intimate conversation between two people where they're exchanging ideas. I think that's the joy of it for me. You get to be in those conversations that you'd never be part of normally. If you think about, I'd like to think, if you take the Paul Watson conversation, there may be lots of vegans out there who won't get the opportunity maybe to have a conversation with somebody like that, or with Carol Adams, or with whoever. And so what I'm trying to do, I guess, is be them, like be the audience, like ask the questions that I hope are on people's minds, but do it in a like genuinely curious kind of way. Like I try and avoid, and it was probably frustrating for some guests, but I don't write questions for any show I ever do. Or that well, I know it works for some people, and some people are really good at that style, but I just can't do it and it be engaging, and it be natural. So yeah, those are the best kind of shows for me. That's what drew me to them. That, as a podcast obsessive, the ones I loved were things like WTF with Mark Maron, yeah, stand-up comedian over in the States. And I don't know how many he's got now, 2,000 episodes or something ludicrous. He's
And
been
not
doing it
just
a
the
long time.
episodes, the hours of each episode.
There's a lot of hours, yeah. And they're genuine. They were always in his garage, and very kind of lo-fi. There was never any video to them either, and I kind of love that. I still kind of love that. Actually, I know video is the format, and as a podcast producer now, I should be advocating heavily for it. But there was something even more intimate about the audio and the you were imagine you get you. I think you just listen so much closer. You can hear the nuance in people's voices, and it makes you pay a different kind of attention for me than watching it. And yeah, they were a couple of hours long, sometimes more. And I know there's other podcasters who shall not be named who do have recently done some very, very high profile, very long interviews. Not so much into that particular the particular podcaster, but WTF I love. That was one that sort of was always kind of, if I could borrow with pride that style, I kind of thought maybe I could do that. And it was always Mark's kind of curious questions that made me attracted to it. Just, you know, he did give an opinion. He had some views, but it was very much like, I'm just going to ask a question and let this person go where they go. Hence why they're 2 hours long. And he had a barber on his show and stuff like that. So it's just amazing.
I agree. I don't, what I do is when I'm preparing, I usually will scribble out just like, almost like a journal, like a very unscripted journal. I will just, what would I ask? What would I ask? What would I ask? What would I ask? So I
Mm,
just to kind of bring it into my brain, but no, because I can't listen to you and think about how I'm going to get you around to that question. So I can't do it.
exactly.
Maybe other people, I think sometimes you see on television, some interviewers are excellent at it, but it's also edited very heavily. So,
Yeah.
and I don't have time to do a whole lot of editing either. And honestly, I do love that same kind of handmade feel to
Mm.
podcasts. And the ones that are extremely produced, I typically, I don't know, they just feel colder to me. I like the idea of somebody making mistakes, or in Carol J. Adams, I just remembered that her dogs needed to be let in or let out or were barking or something. There was
Yeah.
a dog. I love that. And you left it in. And I love that.
I will always leave that stuff in. If unless they ask me to take it out, I will pretty much leave it in. Because unless and there is one bit of advice from another podcast that I love, who does actually do the very, very structured stuff. So there's a guy called Roman Mars. um he presents a long running show called 99% Invisible, which is all about the kind of the hidden design in everything around us. And this really strange stuff that they have episodes on. So they've got like an episode on when they beep out swearing, like on how that beep came about and why it is that particular pitch. Which sounds incredibly dull, but he makes these wonderful documentary style, they're like NPR style documentaries about these really weird subjects. How did this thing in our lives become like that? Who designed it? Why is it like the way it is? And there's always like a fascinating backstory, even to that beep. um, but he said a thing where he was talking about like an onstage thing where he was talking about podcasting, and he said, if you've got 100,000 listeners, I wish I did, I don't, but if you've got 100,000 listeners and you cut out a minute of useless of useless talk, then you've done a service to the world by saving 100,000 minutes. So I do have that somewhere in the back of my mind, but at the same time, I love that intimacy of Carol's got to let the dogs out. So I tend to err towards leaving it in, but it does depend. Now as a producer of podcasts, it depends on the type of show. Like if the dogs being let in doesn't serve the show, um, then it probably shouldn't be in there. And then I'll go with the Roman Mars approach. But if the dogs being let being let in serves, it creates a feeling for the listener, and that's in keeping with the show's kind of don't know what the audio version of aesthetic is, but it's stylings, then then I'll leave it in. So yeah, I think it's got to be the right fit. But certainly for my show, for the Bloody Vegans podcast, it's usually the right fit to leave it in, I think.
Because sometimes it can be very distracting. Other times it's just a moment to like kind of process, like, okay, she's going out
Mm.
to check on the dogs. Now, what were we talking about? I wonder what he's going to ask now, or wonder what she was thinking about that. It gives you a moment to kind of think. Just like in any conversation, there are the interruptions that are like what? Where was I? What did you say? And then are the interruptions that are like, oh, that's good because now I have a chance to remember what's going on here. So you're as a producer now, what changed in your life that made you a production company for podcasters?
Yeah, so like yourself, when you make this many episodes and congratulations on the over 200 mark. Um, when you make that many episodes and you speak to that many people, you get a little network together. It just happens. You didn't necessarily intend it, but that you end up knowing people who know other people, and that's kind of how it all works. And like I said, the vegan community is kind of small in a way, so you tend to find that guest knows that guest who knows that guest who knows that guest, and everyone's kind of interlinked in some way. And in the course of doing that, I like lots of people through COVID was thinking, is this my lot in life? And I will caveat that with, I was very, very lucky. The company I worked for was paying me to work from home, and things I was in, people went through some terrible things in COVID. And if the worst thing that I got to do was contemplate my life, then I'm very, very lucky. And I do count myself very lucky. Um, but I did get to reflect, and I've got a very young son. He's 6 years old now. So he was like 2 years old at the time. And I did think to myself, like, I was approaching 40, and I was thinking, do I want to do what I'm doing for the rest of my working days? If I work for the next, if I'm lucky enough to be around in 25, 30 years, and I'm working, what do I want to be doing? What sort of impact do I want to be making on the world? And what do I want to say to my little boy that I do? When he says, "What do you do, Dad, for work?" What do I want to say? And there was nothing, no disrespect to what I was doing. I just didn't. I didn't. My heart wasn't there. I didn't feel like that was the work that I should be doing. So I started thinking about what I could do. And through this network of people, there was a few people that I knew who had spoken about podcasts and had just asked me for advice on things. And, how do you do this? And equipment, and what sort of editing equipment editing software do you use? And do you do video? And how do you do video and lighting and bits and pieces? And on some of that stuff, I would consider myself very well versed, and other stuff I had to catch up on. Like I still at, I'm very much audio. Audio engineering is kind of something that I have a background in, through misspent youth in bands and things like that, and trying to still trying to, I'm still failing at trying to be a rock star, all of that kind of stuff. So I had experience in that, and I'm a massive nerd. So I worked for, like I say, worked for a big tech company. So and I was very passionate about the tech. I am very passionate. I'm very, very into that stuff. Very into computers, very into software. So the kind of audio engineering side of me and the tech side of me just drove me to, like, right, I need to fill in all the gaps in my knowledge and help these people who are asking me for this, for advice and help. And then from there, I kind of thought this could be a business maybe. So I started to, like, wind down my sort of corporate job, if you like. I stepped into a different role, um, and where I had less responsibility ultimately, and then eventually went part time, and then eventually left, um, as I started to get more clients. And my clients are podcast hosts. Ultimately, they are hosts of shows. Many of them didn't have a show before, and so they started with me, and we've worked on that show together from scratch, from inception. Other people came to me with a show that they were already working on, and they just, as you know, podcasting is a lot more work than you can think it is if you're just starting out. So a lot of people who are doing a show kind of said, I love being a podcast host. What I don't love is editing a podcast. I don't particularly love making loads of clips, that kind of stuff. Um, I don't love subtitling things, all of those kind of things. So that's where I kind of stepped in for some of those folks too. So, and the rest is kind of history. I'm sort of what am I now, like 3 years into doing that, um, and have a nice little client base, and things are going quite well so far. It
Well, I'm aware of many of your accounts. You have a wonderful, I don't know, would you call them a stable of podcasts? Are you like goal hanger yet?
Oh, I wish I was like Goalhanger. I don't quite have Gary Lineker's influence or cash to back it up, but but he's got a lot of good shows, definitely for sure. But yeah, no, I'm lucky. I've got some shows that I love working on. I really do. Like, just a name check, Think Like a Vegan. Amelia Lisa's show is genuinely one of my favorite podcasts. I'm so lucky to be able to edit it. It's wonderful. It's a very different style to and almost a different style to, like, I said all this all the shows I liked, that have got that kind of long and very informal kind of style. And this is much more like, this is like a little, almost like a little lecture, like a mini university lecture. You're lucky enough to be at Amelia's university, and she is just an amazing source of knowledge and knows so many wonderful people who, again, talk about educating me in veganism. Every time she's got a new guest, I'm like, wow, who is this? Like, that they're incredible. Like, um, there's been some incredible people on that show, so I'm very lucky to produce it, and I love the style of it. We on that show we did go for a much more kind of polished approach, um, kind of NPR documentary style, a little bit more. That was where perhaps I was leaning much more into my Roman Mars, into my 99% invisible stylings, but it suits that show, and it's right for that show, and I love it. I genuinely love it.
So, what goes into making a different soundscape or a sound in a podcast? What do you do? Is it host driven? Is it the voice driven? Is it something that people can do to add that kind of layer of sound that we hear that we don't always have the vocabulary to describe?
Yeah, that's such a good question, because it's really not as straightforward in my mind as hit record, pick up a microphone, and it can be like, I don't want to put people off podcasting. Like, you can get any mic that is available to you, even the mic on your phone, and you could hit record on voice notes, and you could make a podcast on your phone. That is one of the beauties of it. It's so accessible to people. But once you start thinking about it in a more creative way, there are there are many levers you can pull to create a different feeling in the audience. And they're a combination of things. So the host's voice, absolutely. Thinking about the host's voice, and what do we do with the host's voice? So I suppose there's a few things to consider. Firstly, obviously, there is the equipment. There's no denying that there is an element of um, a microphone's technical ability to pick up certain frequencies, and in a certain, what we call, polar pattern. So every mic has what's called a polar pattern. And this is kind of essentially what sound it is picking up and where from. So you may have heard, like, the term an omnidirectional mic. Um, that's a microphone that tries to pick up everything around it, everything within the room, which some people might think, well, that's a good thing, right? Picking up more is good. But it's really not for this. If you think about it, trying to create intimacy, trying to really hear the nuance and the depth in somebody's voice, then you want to hear their voice almost uninterrupted by the room. If you really listen to a room that you're sat in, which sounds like an odd concept, but if you sit in silence in your room, no room is silent. Every room has a floor to it, a noise floor. It has acoustics to it. If you clap in a room, is there a reverberation when you clap or not? that will alter somebody's voice. So you have to think about the room that you're in, the equipment that you're using, and then the individual's voice itself and how they deliver the content that they're delivering. And you're putting all of that together. And then on top of that, there's kind of like a post-production element where you're then looking at, so for example, if I have a new client, one of the things I'll do once we've established the right equipment and we've worked on their room, and what I say worked on their room, what we're ultimately trying to do is soften that room and deaden it. So when we do clap in that room, we don't hear a reverb at all. We just hear nothing. So that your voice isn't reflecting off of surfaces and bouncing back into the microphone and creating unintended sounds that we don't want. So if you think about, if you've ever hit record on any recording device and you were in a bathroom or a kitchen where there's a lot of tiling and maybe wooden floors or tiled floors or that kind of thing, there's so many reflective surfaces so that your voice is bouncing around that room and then it's bouncing back into the mic, hence you getting that sort of reverb and that echo. You don't want that. It doesn't sound great. But if you think about, uh, maybe no one's ever done this, but if you stood in your in a cupboard full of clothes, and you recorded, there'd be nothing because the clothes are absorbing all of the energy of your voice that's going beyond that microphone. So we want to create a dead room. We want to have a nice microphone. It doesn't need to be the most expensive. The room is actually more important than the microphone, in my view. A good microphone in a bad room will give you a bad result. An okay, mediocre microphone in a good room will give you a great result. So it's more important to get the room right first, and actually, that's the beauty of that is that's quite accessible. It's quite a low cost thing to do. Soft furnishings, curtains, clothes, getting in your cupboard, all of those things will help. Blankets, duvets, anything. You can use anything to help a room's acoustics. And then once we've done all of that and we've recorded the voice, we then work on the EQ of the voice. So um, our voices have energy in kind of different frequencies. So some of our voices have like a more depth to them. Some of them have higher frequencies, higher pitch frequencies. But there's a place on, like, if you imagine like a spectrum of frequency, and you think about the sort of wavy lines that you'd see if you were recording a voice. That's where the energy of the voice is. It's bouncing up and down. You can see that energy of that voice. And so you're then trying to accentuate the things that you want in the voice and trying to maybe reduce some of the things that you don't want to make it kind of sound intimate and pleasing. So generally, not to get, I don't want to get too nerdy and technical, but if under 100 hertz, for example, generally humans can't hear it, and if they can, it's a rumble and it's not very pleasant. So you start by, you remove most of the frequencies under 100 hertz straight off the bat, and then you just get rid of a lot of unintended rumbling. And then there's a little spike around 500 hertz that you might get rid of as well, because it never sounds very good. So you just drop a little bit of that. Then you add a little bit into the highs just to give a bit of breadth and feel a bit of air, if that makes any sense, into the voice. And you just go up a little bit in the depth area as well. So there's a bit of depth to the voice. And once you've done all of that, you get this lovely kind of intimate podcasty sound, radio broadcasting sound to somebody's voice, but it's uniquely them at the same time. So that's kind of a unique process for every client, but there are things that are there's a sort of a set of steps, if you like, to follow to help you do that. So I do that, and then there's lots of other incidental stuff that we look at. So if we talk about Amelia and I think like a vegan podcast, that heavily uses music at certain points in the show. So the choice of that music and where that music is and where it sits underneath Amelia's voice, as in at what level it sits, how loud is it, how quiet is it, when does it peak, when does it trough, that's all got to be considered as well. So you're really trying to create a sound stage, if you like, for your listener, um, that is appropriate for the show. And there's lots of all the things I've just mentioned are all your sort of tools to help you do that.
And it helps you with the consistency of the sound. If there's one thing I know for sure, there's not that much consistency in the sound of my podcast because I'm not always in the same place. And very often I'm just hiding from grandchildren or a dog. I have been in closets, I've been in rooms. So um, today I'm hiding from the blowers. I'm on the different side of the house because the leaf blowers are out in force in my neighborhood. So I'm on the side that doesn't have too much access to the leaf blowers. So now your company is called basically the same thing as your podcast, The Bloody Vegans. You are the Bloody Vegans Productions. Does that, from a marketing, from a business standpoint, does that mean that people don't work with you if they can't really look in the mirror and say, I'm vegan?
I have non-vegan clients, and I'm not adverse to having non-vegan clients as long as the content of their show is not non-vegan, as it were. So, for example, I have a show that is uh it caters to dance business school owners, so dance school owners. Okay. Um, which sounds really niche, but when you think about it, I don't know if it's the same in the US, I'm sure it is. But in the UK, there's probably like 4 or 5 dance schools in every town. There's actually a lot of dance studios around teaching a lot of kids and adults, like, whether it's ballroom or tap or, salsa or, street dance or whatever. So, um, this client of mine, she coaches dance school owners in, running a better dance school. She's not vegan. She's not anti-vegan. The show's content is not anti-vegan. So, I'm fine with that. I wouldn't do a show about hunting or something, of course. Um, but as long as my clients are kind of open to who I am and I kind of see it in a way as like being open to non-vegan clients. I actually I end up in a lot of discussions about veganism with people who, I mean, for example, I just have signed a new client last week, and she had been recommended me by somebody else, and she said, "Oh, I'm interested in the name of your company. Like, so do you only do you have to be vegan to work with you?" And I was like, no, not at all. And then she started talking about veganism, and we had a really good conversation about veganism. And I'd like to think that, and I've had quite a few of those with my non-vegan clients. Naturally, I don't have as many non-vegan clients as I have vegan clients because the name does attract vegans. Um, but the ones I have, like, I'd say all of them are on some sort of journey. um towards it. I think they are, whether they kind of would say that or not, but they all mention, "Oh, I tried this the other day, and I'd never tried that before," or they'll say, "Oh, I heard about this the other day, like about the." There was some new vegan thing over here that somebody was. What did you think of that? They'll ask for just in passing, and so in a sort of strange way, it's a sort of unintended uh, uh, sort of a piece of activism. I never thought I'd get any non-vegans at all, really, who wanted to work with me. But I suppose people are used to production companies of varying kinds having lots of different different names. Um, so it hasn't hindered me. I'm happy that I speak to non-vegans, again, like, get out of our echo chambers a little bit. But I'm also really, really happy to I love perpetuating the sort of vegan message through people's podcasts as well. I think that feels great work to put a skill that I hopefully have in producing shows to good work by helping other people get their kind of vegan message and their vegan voice out there. Like, because I could never do what, say, Amelia does. I haven't got the intellect for it, for one. Um, uh, and so I feel grateful that I get to be part of helping that message get out there. Um, so yeah, I like both angles of it, of the business actually, but I suppose it is a name that could cause me problems. But and people have said to me, should you call your business that? Really, if you're going to serve non-vegans, like why don't you call it something else? And at the same time, I'm like, no, I'm quite happy with the name. If some people really don't like it because they're really anti-vegan, then okay, fine.
Well, I mean, I think if you didn't know that you were vegan and very involved and active in that community, you could also just see it as a very rock and roll name, the Bloody Vegans. I mean, I think you could imagine a band called the Bloody Vegans where nobody was a vegan. So it works
Yeah.
on a multitude of levels. And I think also that you are vegan when you would have that conversation, or people will have that conversation with you only because they know you're vegan. If you were just Jim Moore Productions and you were just concerned about getting their show sounding great and up every week and well produced, they would not have that conversation with you.
No, I mean, totally true. So yeah, if you're putting your name in there, then it does spark a conversation. You're absolutely right. Um, and I've taken that a little further by I'm involved in another business which is absolutely not a vegan business at all, which is about it's kind of like a football team, so UK football, soccer, um, that that targets kind of men specifically at the moment who want to lose weight and want to be healthy again. Maybe they used to play and then they had kids and stuff and they stopped playing. So it's kind of like a group that supports each other and so on and so forth. And I'm involved in the running of it, but I've also sponsored that football team. So it's on the shorts. So it's the name Bloody Vegans Productions is on everyone's shorts, which of course has sparked a whole load more conversations because people, the opposition, the players themselves, who only know me as a coach within this football team, um, often are like, "Oh, what's this about?" And then that leads to lots of other conversations. So I kind of like the fact that the name is sort of it sparks a question in people, and I love your it could be a band. Immediately, I could imagine the Bloody Vegans supporting the Sex Pistols in like 1977 somewhere in
100%.
in Camden.
So I don't want to keep you all day, but I do want to get a little bit more about your attitude about who for whom as a producer who needs a podcast.
Who needs a podcast? Now that's so there's what I don't want to say is like everybody should have a podcast. Like
That's what I say.
yeah, they can, but I don't feel I don't want people to feel like they need to at the same time. Like
Mm.
there's lots of different ways to get your voice out there, and I've had some folks who have come to me and they've said words to the effect of I was speaking to my marketing consultant and they said I should have a podcast, and I can instantly feel their hearts not in it. And I've spoken to them about it, and they've kind of never listened to a podcast, and they're not really that. And actually, some of those, even though we've had a good conversation about what podcasting is and so on, it's just not right for them. They've just come to the conclusion that it's not their thing, and I'm absolutely fine with that because I think even if you've got an editor, it's still a commitment. It's a commitment in time and you have to and headspace. You especially if you're on like a schedule of like a weekly schedule, even if you're on a fortnightly schedule, it's you're on a hamster wheel. When you start a podcast. And that can be tricky to manage, and if your heart's not really in doing it, like you haven't got something that you want to say, or even if it's not you want to say, if you haven't got if you don't want to create a platform maybe for other people to say something, or there isn't something that your show is going to be saying either through you or a guest, then don't have one. But having said that, um, there are a lot of people who I think could benefit from it in today's world. I think if if you ask me like, what's your if we got like, let's take the world as it is now, what's really popular, like social media, everybody who's got a company or is not even just who owns a company, but just anybody who feels like they want to get a message out there, then their go-tos, what are they? Their go-to is social media, right? That's the great, supposedly the great democratization of information. But what has it kind of done is it's made us all slaves to a particular algorithm. So actually there isn't a democratization in a way. Actually, what we're doing is we're all kind of marching to Mark Zuckerberg's tune or Elon Musk's tune or whatever. And don't get me wrong, you can crack through with certain things and you can build a community, and there's lots of great things about social media, but that there is if you want to be popular on social media and you want to grow, then you do have to kind of dance to that tune to a degree. What I love about podcasting, certainly at the moment, is you don't. There isn't necessarily that about it. There isn't an algorithm pushing people to a certain type of content. It's still really, and it's may change, but it's still really heavily driven by search on the podcast platforms, by literally search terms. It's kind of old school in that regard, old school internet kind of in that regard. That if you're searching for veganism, generally you'll get here's the popular shows about veganism. You won't get well, we saw that last Thursday you bought some Via Life cheese in the supermarket, so maybe you'll be interested in this. It's not doing that kind of like slightly 1984 Orwellian work on us just yet. I'm sure it will, because that's the way things go. But at the moment, it's you're not being told, oh, your content needs to be 6 seconds long. You're not being told how it should be by anybody. And I love that. If you want to make a 3 hour conversation, you can make a 3 hour conversation. If you want to make a 20-minute documentary, fine. I've got a show at the moment that's 5 minutes long and it's brilliant. It's like a 5 minute, it's a wonderful like vegan marketing and like website design company. So they deal with like it's kind of it's marketing and website design for good people doing good things, I think is the strap line. And they generally deal with like ethical companies and charities and vegan companies and stuff like this. And Emily, who runs it, is vegan, and she does like 5 minute shows about, it might be like, when's the right time to rebrand your business or your charity, and then she'll give tips on it and stuff like this. And it's 5 minutes. And there's no one telling her it can't be 5 minutes. There's no one saying it should be longer, it should be shorter. And so I love that about it. I genuinely feel like it is truly a place for you to speak in the way you want to speak, in the style you want to speak, um, and to the people you want to speak to as well. There's obviously like elements of promotion where you have to play a little bit of the social media game to get people to your show. But once they're there, then they're in your house, as it were. They're on your terms, and that's wonderful. Because I think, how can we communicate effectively when we have to communicate in 140 characters and in 6 second bursts like that? Maybe it's just me and I'm too verbose, but I don't think we can communicate effectively. I don't think humans were designed to talk like that. Um, yeah, well, we're not all like, we all haven't got our own marketing departments. And so I think that's what leads to so many issues in the world, in a way, is that we're being forced into this clipped form of communication and being told that it's community. Is it? I don't know. Whereas like a podcast feels like you can speak how you want to speak. Like I say, you can get the point across in as many words as it requires to get the point across in the style that you want to get it across in. And if people listen to that, then they will get your a real flavor of who you are and what you're about, as opposed to a heavily manufactured version of that, which is what we generally put out on our socials.
Yeah, the sound bites which
Mm.
we have an election going on right now, an election by sound bites where they try to find one side tries to find the sound bite where somebody sounds absolutely demented or evil, and the other one's just putting out a heavily redacted sound bite that makes them look like they've got the answers to your questions, and it's targeted at the exact demographic, and we're all hearing different sound bites. And so this is, I agree, what you're saying is that a podcast is an ability for you to hear not just what somebody's saying, but what goes into what they're saying,
Mm.
where they came up with it, what they're concerned about, because we need to think a little more critically about most of these issues.
It's not unmoored from context. Every other bit of conversation that we have online is usually unmoored from its context. There's no, there's nothing surrounding it. It's just, here's my thought. And then somebody responds with, I'm angry at that thought. And where's that getting us? I don't know. I think it's a race to the bottom. Whereas, in it, like you say, if you can give the what led to your thought, the context to your thought, I might disagree with you. I might think, no, I don't know about that. But that's fine. Like we can disagree. Disagreeing's great, like you said, you can. I love the fact you can listen to an episode, somebody like Carol Adams, and you can go, I think that's good. I don't agree with that. That's brilliant. Like that's. I think then we've all done our job by sparking some thought and some conversation. But I don't see the same conversation sparked in other forms of accessible social media and the other accessible platforms to us. I see those sparking like division as opposed to sort of understanding and debate, like genuine debate, what we call debate on, like, you remember like when Twitter was, people used to refer to it as, oh, it's like a town square, where, and it's like, maybe, but I'm not sure it is. It certainly isn't now, but was it ever really? Um, did people talk like that? Do people talk in 140 characters or 280 or whatever it was at the time? I don't know. I don't know. So yeah, for me, like it's an unrivaled platform in terms of um its ability to effectively communicate, um or to allow us to effectively communicate, and coupled with the democratization of it and how easy and accessible it is to start a show, um, then it's unrivaled for me. Like, what other platform gives you that?
I agree. No, I agree. Everybody knows I love podcasts and I listen to them all day long. So, Jim Moore, Bloody Vegans Productions. How can people work with you if they have an idea or if they're sick of figuring out how to do it on Descript or Audible, or
Yeah, yeah.
if they have another part-time job they need to get to, how do they get a chance to work with you?
Yeah, so if they head to the website, so bloodyvegansproductions.com, vegans with, make sure you get the S on the end. Lots of people think it's bloody vegan, but we're all the bloody vegans, not just me. Bloodyvegansproductions.com. Head to that. There's two ways. There's either a contact little form, you can fill that in and basically say, hey, I want to chat to you about podcasting. Or there's a tab that says book a consultation, and there's a bit that says free initial consultation. Hit that, and you can arrange a chat with me, and we can talk about your show. And so that first chat, we'll sort of find out your ideas and so on, and we'll go from there, um, and see whether it's right for you, and if so, what's the show going to be like, and then we work on it together from that point. So yeah, and I think I'm giving an exclusive to your listeners too. So if anybody does get in touch with me, um, the and they sign up and they want to do a show together, then their first episode they're going to get 50% off that. So just all they need to do is just mention Veg Your Best in that initial consultation with me, and they'll get 50% off their first episode. So yeah.
Well, that's very generous. Thank you, Jim. On behalf of my listeners, even if they don't take you up on it, I think they feel very, very special.
Well, it's not. I don't hand it out to everybody that. So,
Oh, there you go.
but no, I appreciate it.
And what about, can we also, if someone's interested in the work you're doing in the new business you're talking about in terms of men's health and weight loss
Yeah.
and that sort of thing, is that available on the same web page?
No, it's a completely different entity, but yeah, so that is at the moment it's very, very local to a town in the UK called Reading. So Reading, Reading, not Redding, Reading, which is like, what's that, Pennsylvania, is it? Somewhere like that. Um so yeah, Reading with EA. So, but if you typed in Reading XL, as in X, the letter X and then the letter L, FC, you will find out about that other business that I'm involved in at the moment. And yeah, coaching some good old UK soccer.
Thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. Honestly, been an absolute pleasure. Love chatting with you, Michelle. Love the show.
So what did you think of Jim Moore from the Bloody Vegans podcast? I was a guest on the Bloody Vegans quite a while ago. Does that mean I can now call myself officially a Bloody Vegan? I forgot to ask him. Anyway, it took way too long for me to get Jim on here at Veg Your Best. So I'm super grateful that Jim made the time for us. And I highly recommend you add the Bloody Vegans podcast to your podcast queue. He has a huge back catalog of every sort of guest, and each one, I promise you, will bring different nuances and ideas wherever you are on your vegan or plant-based journey. And this podcast, I'm telling you, it's an excellent one to suggest to people who may be easing into some of the ideas we talk about here on the show as they limit and eliminate certain animal products from their lives. So we'll have all the links in the show notes, but how can you forget that title? You don't need the links, the Bloody Vegans. And if you yourself have been thinking about starting a podcast, Jim always offers free consultations. And then if you decide to go with him on a podcast strategy, the first episode, he's giving you a discount, 50% off the first episode. So all you have to do is mention Veg Your Best. I think we should all feel very flattered that he's offering that to this group. Now, before I let you go, Jim and I discussed the importance of both serving listeners and businesses that are vegan or are already interested in veganism, but also in looking for ways to get out of our echo chambers and engage with a diverse audience. How can podcasters ensure they're reaching and resonating with a wide range of listeners? I would love to hear your thoughts about how we can help each other feel safe enough to lean into some of the ideas that feel challenging sometimes. So I recommend you give that a little bit of thought this week as you veg your best. Veg Your Best podcast production, music, and editing by Charlie Weinshank. Thanks, Charlie. Before you go, it would mean so much to me and the Veg Your Best team if you would hit subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, or share with someone you think might be interested. Something about algorithms, it helps bump us up a little in the rankings, and that's the best way to help others find the podcast and for us to find our audience. So, until next week, make it easy and veg your best.